The factory floor smelled of oil, metal, and tension as Jack Miller walked in, his worn jacket smeared with grease, Caleb clutching a toy wrench and balancing his half-finished school project. 30 engineers had been circling the massive industrial machine for months, shaking their heads at every failed attempt. Victor Shaw, the chief engineer, glanced at Jack and smirked, dismissing him with a wave. "You are not qualified to touch this, Jack," he said, pointing toward the control panel with a confidence born of arrogance and oversight. The worn safety bolt lay in plain view on the machine, its surface scratched and dulled by years of use. Yet no one had acknowledged its importance until now. Jack knelt beside the machine, fingers brushing the maintenance log that Victor had ignored for weeks, each page detailing patterns and notes overlooked by every supposed expert in the room. Caleb looked up at his father, eyes wide but steady, and whispered, "Daddy, can you fix it?" Jack nodded without a word, his jaw tightening as he scanned the room full of skeptical faces. Rebecca Collins, the CEO of the auto parts factory, entered the warehouse with precise steps, her polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. She stopped, absorbing the scene. 30 engineers frozen in uncertainty, the massive machine dormant, Jack kneeling with calm authority, and the worn bolt catching the harsh fluorescent light. Her gaze flicked between the maintenance log and Jack's focused expression, registering the quiet competence she had not expected to find. Victor Shaw rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath about protocol and safety regulations, his dismissive laughter echoing off the high ceilings. But Rebecca did not flinch. The tension was thick, the silence punctuated only by the hum of idle machinery. Caleb held his toy wrench like a badge of bravery, leaning slightly forward as if sensing the weight of the moment, and Jack gently adjusted his son's hand, steadying him without breaking concentration. Every engineer in the room had failed to see what lay in front of them. The worn safety bolt, the small but critical element that had been ignored, and the meticulous maintenance log that detailed the machine's hidden rhythms. Jack's hands moved deliberately over the bolt, fingers tracing the grooves, eyes narrowing as he mentally mapped the adjustments. Rebecca watched quietly, noting the patience and precision in his movements, realizing that what others had called impossible was not a matter of complexity, but of awareness and respect for detail. Victor Shaw stepped back, irritation flickering across his face as he realized that Jack's understanding was rooted not in training manuals, but in practical mastery and experience, something decades of engineering degrees had not instilled. Caleb tapped the wrench gently against the floor, a soft metallic sound that drew a few glances, yet Jack did not react. He had rehearsed this in his mind countless times, and every motion was measured, every decision intentional. The engineers murmured among themselves, their skepticism giving way to unease as the calm confidence of a single dad with a toy-wielding child began to overshadow their months of failure. Rebecca took a slow breath, the weight of leadership pressing on her as she stepped closer to get a better view of the bolt and the log, recognizing for the first time that a simple component, long overlooked, could hold the solution to a crisis that had stumped an army of experts. Jack's hand hovered over the bolt, Caleb's small fingers brushing the edge of the log, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for a moment that could redefine authority, competence, and respect. The hum of anticipation built as Jack prepared to make the first precise adjustment, aware that every eye was on him, that every misjudgment could be catastrophic, and yet his demeanor remained calm, steady, and quietly commanding. The soft gleam of the worn safety bolt caught the overhead light as Jack's fingers gripped it, and a micro-movement of understanding passed through Rebecca's expression, hinting at the revelation to come, while Victor Shaw's posture stiffened with a sense of impending accountability. Caleb's whisper, "Daddy, this is it," hung in the air, fragile but clear, and Jack's eyes met his son's for a heartbeat of shared trust. Before returning to the task, the warehouse seemed to shrink around them, time stretching in the anticipation of action and proof. As Jack began the precise turn that would awaken the machine from its dormancy, the frame froze in cinematic tension, the worn safety bolt poised as the smallest detail with the largest consequence, leaving the audience suspended in expectation, knowing that a single action, a single bolt, would determine who truly understood the machine and who had only pretended to. Jack did not turn the bolt yet, because a man who had spent years keeping machines alive knew the difference between being watched and being understood. His fingers rested on the worn safety bolt, steady and careful, while the room waited for him to either fail in public or prove something no one had wanted to believe. To everyone else, Jack Miller was just the night shift mechanic, the man who came in after the offices went dark, after the managers went home, after the good coffee was replaced by burnt break room coffee, and the factory lights hummed like tired insects over concrete floors. He was the man who checked gauges at 2 in the morning, wiped oil from sensor housings, replaced cracked belts before they snapped, and wrote down every strange vibration in a maintenance log nobody important seemed to read. But to Caleb, standing beside him with a toy wrench tucked under one arm and a cardboard school project balanced against his knee, Jack was the man who could fix almost anything except the price of rent, the late fee on the electric bill, and the quiet fear that lived in their apartment mailbox every Friday. Their mornings began before most people opened their eyes. Jack would come home from the plant at 6:15, smelling faintly of metal, coolant, and soap that never fully won the fight. He would park his old pickup under the flickering light behind their apartment building, sit for one breath with both hands on the wheel, then climb the stairs as quietly as he could so he would not wake the neighbor who worked double shifts at the diner. Caleb would usually be awake anyway. He was 8 years old and serious in the way children become serious when they learn early that adults are tired. He would be sitting at the kitchen table with a cereal bowl, one sock on, one sock missing, and his toy wrench beside his homework like a tool waiting for instructions. Jack would kiss the top of his head, check the backpack, sign the reading folder, and make sure the school project had not been crushed by yesterday. The project that week was called Simple Machines in American Industry, and Caleb had built a small cardboard model of a factory line using craft sticks, bottle caps, and a rubber band conveyor belt. At the center of it, he had taped a tiny silver circle and written in careful block letters, "Safety Bolt." Jack had smiled when he saw it, but the smile had stayed small. Some things looked small only to people who had never watched a whole system fail, because one person dismissed the part that kept it honest. Their apartment was clean, because Jack believed a person could be broke without living like he had surrendered. The couch sagged in the middle. The kitchen table had one leg stabilized by a folded piece of cardboard. The refrigerator door held Caleb's spelling tests, a factory schedule, a rent notice with a red stamp, and a calendar where Jack marked every bill in blue pen. Rent was due on the 1st, gas on the 9th, electric on the 14th, school lunch account on the 17th, insurance on the 22nd. He kept a shoebox on the top shelf of the closet with receipts clipped by month, pay stubs folded in half, repair invoices for the pickup, and every note from Caleb's school. He did not keep records because he expected sympathy. He kept records because records remembered what busy people forgot. At the factory, that habit had made him unpopular with men like Chief Engineer Victor Shaw. Victor liked reports with polished covers, language that sounded expensive, and diagrams made for conference rooms. Jack liked numbers written down at the moment they happened. Motor temperature at 1:43 in the morning. Belt drift by 1/8 inch over a 6-hour run. Safety bolt showing uneven where near the shoulder. Vibration rising after 40,000 cycles. He wrote it all in the maintenance log with the same careful hand he used to sign Caleb's permission slips. He had flagged the worn safety bolt 3 times. Once in pencil, once in blue ink, once with a yellow tab he had taken from Caleb's homework folder because the factory supply cabinet was empty again. He had left the log on Victor Shaw's desk with a note that said, "Line 3 cannot carry another full-speed run without inspection." The note came back 2 days later with a coffee ring on the corner and no signature. That was how disrespect often arrived in Jack's life. Not a shouting, not as a slammed door, just a paper returned with a stain, a look that slid past him, a supervisor using the word mechanic as though it meant less than man. Jack did not complain. Complaining took energy. He spent his energy getting Caleb to school on time, keeping groceries in the cupboard, and staying awake long enough to hear about spelling words, cafeteria stories, and the girl in class who said Caleb's dad could not be a real engineer because he wore work boots. Caleb had asked about it one night while Jack was heating canned soup in a saucepan with a loose handle. "Is a mechanic less than an engineer, Daddy?" Jack had stirred the soup slowly and thought about every answer that would have been too bitter for an 8-year-old. Then he said, A good mechanic listens to the machine. A good engineer does too. The title matters less than whether you are willing to notice what is true. Caleb had nodded as if he understood more than Jack wanted him to. The next morning, he drew a small wrench on the corner of his school project and wrote, "Details matter." Now that same project sat on the factory floor near his shoes, its cardboard conveyor belt slightly bent from being carried through security, its bottle cap wheels shining under fluorescent lights. Caleb had begged to bring it because his class presentation was the next day, and Jack had promised to help him explain how a factory line worked after his shift. He had not expected the machine to be dead when he arrived. He had not expected 30 engineers from 3 outside firms to be standing around it with tablets, diagrams, and tired faces. He had not expected Victor Shaw to announce in front of them that the night shift mechanic should stay out of the way before he made the situation worse. And he had not expected Rebecca Collins, the white female CEO of the auto parts factory, to walk in at that exact moment with a face calm enough to make everyone else stand straighter. Rebecca did not know about the rent notice on Jack's refrigerator. She did not know he had packed Caleb's lunch in a reused bread bag that morning because he had forgotten to buy sandwich bags. She did not know his pickup needed new tires before winter or that he had turned down overtime twice that month because Caleb had a parent-teacher meeting and a dentist appointment. She only saw a man in a faded work shirt kneeling beside a stalled machine, a little boy holding a toy wrench, a maintenance log open on the concrete, and one worn safety bolt resting under Jack's fingertips like a small answer waiting for permission to be heard. Victor saw her looking and stepped forward quickly, the way men step forward when they realize silence is becoming dangerous. "Miss Collins," he said, "we have already reviewed the obvious components. This is far beyond routine maintenance." Jack kept his eyes on the bolt. He had heard that tone before. It was the tone of a man trying to bury a simple truth under complicated words. Rebecca did not answer Victor right away. She looked down at the maintenance log. The yellow tab was still there, slightly bent at the edge. On the open page, Jack's handwriting was clear. Bolt wear increasing. Alignment shift under load. Recommend immediate replacement before full capacity run. Date, time, line number, and initials. Caleb leaned closer to his father and whispered, "You wrote it down." Jack gave the smallest nod. "Yes, buddy," he said quietly. "I did." The words were not loud, but they landed with weight. Because in a room full of experts, polished shoes, corporate pressure, and a machine that had cost the company more than most families would see in a lifetime, the first real proof was not a speech. It was not a promise. It was not a dramatic claim. It was a worn bolt, a logbook, and a single dad who had been paying attention long before anyone decided to watch him. Rebecca bent slightly, close enough to read the note herself. Her expression did not change much, but something in her eyes sharpened. Victor's jaw tightened. Jack saw it without looking directly at him. The room had begun to shift, not loudly, not fully, but enough for every engineer nearby to feel it. Caleb held his toy wrench tighter. Jack lifted his hand from the bolt at last and reached for the maintenance log, turning back one page, then another, revealing a quiet trail of warnings no one had wanted to follow. Rebecca's voice was low when she finally spoke. "Mr. Shaw, why was this entry not escalated?" For the first time since Jack had walked onto the floor, Victor did not answer immediately. Rebecca Collins stood in the center of the factory floor, her sharp eyes taking in the expanse of machinery, assembly lines, and blinking control panels. She had spent the morning moving between the investor conference room, the boardroom lined with polished walnut, the legal office where contracts and clauses were stacked in neat towers, and now the factory, where the hum of equipment underscored every whispered conversation. Victor Shaw hovered near the control console, gesturing toward a cluster of screens that displayed failure codes and production metrics. His tone clipped, authoritative, and dismissive. He insisted that the line could run safely despite the irregular readings noted in the maintenance log, waving off the worn safety bolt as a minor detail, a relic that had always held the machine together despite decades of stress. The hidden crisis had been simmering unnoticed, subtle vibrations traveling through the gears, small misalignments that no one in the executive suite had seen, no investor had been briefed on, and no corporate protocol had flagged. Jack Miller's presence at the far end of the line, kneeling with his son Caleb perched nearby, the toy wrench balanced in his hand, as if ready to intervene, contrasted sharply with the confident movements of Victor Shaw and the anxious glance of the production supervisors. Rebecca's gaze shifted from the log that Jack had quietly laid on the steel table to the bolt resting in his palm, its surface dulled, scratched, and slightly out of round. Yet every mark was a testament to the factory's memory of stress, wear, and past fixes that had held the operation together in the absence of perfect oversight. She thought of the meetings earlier that week in the boardroom, where shareholders had questioned her ability to maintain efficiency while scaling operations, where legal counsel had pressed on liability issues, and where the CFO had noted gaps in safety documentation. None of them had considered that one worn bolt could be the linchpin of a production line worth millions in revenue per day, or that the maintenance log, previously ignored, held the precise sequence of alerts, fixes, and deviations that traced the factory's heartbeat. Victor's voice rose slightly, insisting that they override the sensor readings, dismissing the vibration anomalies as minor, and recommending that the line restart immediately, pushing for a decision that could risk downtime, contract penalties, and safety violations. Rebecca took a slow breath, feeling the weight of authority pressing against her. Every choice she made in this space would ripple through contracts, investor confidence, and the factory's operational integrity. The subtle creak of a conveyor belt, the steady blinking of indicator lights, and the faint metallic resonance of the aged machine made her aware that she was standing at the center of a delicate balance between risk and competence, between dismissive confidence and proven skill. Jack's hand lingered on the bolt, and his eyes, steady and calm, scanned the machinery with the familiarity of someone who had spent nights observing, listening, adjusting, and noting the smallest irregularities in the logs. Caleb's small gaze mirrored his father's intensity, the toy wrench now a symbol of attention and trust, of a father guiding a son through observation and precise care. The maintenance log lay open between them, pages carefully annotated with dates, notes on torque tolerances, vibration patterns, and past replacements, a quiet record of diligence that Victor Shaw had brushed aside in his hurry to assert control. Rebecca's eyes followed every movement, registering the contrast, Victor's haste and assumption, the engineer's uncertainty, Jack's quiet command, and the small hands of his son engaged in careful mimicry. The air seemed heavier as she considered the stakes. A misjudged decision could halt production, risk investor confidence, and expose legal liabilities. Yet here stood a man in a worn jacket and a boy clutching a toy, bringing clarity through careful attention and the proof that Victor had ignored. She could see the subtle shift in the room as other engineers, initially confident in their collective expertise, began to glance at the log and the bolt with a new sense of awareness. The machine had been waiting for someone to read the hidden cues, to act with understanding rather than authority, to reconcile the worn safety bolt with the documented history of maintenance. The room grew still, the murmurs of disagreement fading into the hum of machinery as all eyes tracked Jack's deliberate assessment. Caleb adjusted his stance, eyes wide but calm, and Jack spoke quietly, almost to himself, aligning the worn bolt with precision, following the sequence indicated in the log. Rebecca's pulse quickened as she realized that the resolution, if it came, would not be loud or dramatic, but meticulously quiet, a proof-based payoff for patience, observation, and competence. Victor Shaw shifted uneasily, aware that the authority he had wielded so confidently was now being quietly undermined by facts he had ignored, by a log he had dismissed, and by a worn bolt that contained more operational wisdom than any report he had produced. Jack's fingers gripped the bolt firmly, checking torque, alignment, and wear patterns, consulting the maintenance log with each subtle movement, the boy at his side mirroring his focus. Rebecca Collins stepped slightly closer, her polished shoes making soft contact with the concrete floor, her arms crossed loosely, eyes narrowing as she traced each notation in the log and each mark on the bolt, understanding for the first time the depth of oversight Jack had maintained. The hum of the factory seemed to quiet further as Jack began a subtle adjustment, a turn that no one else had tried, aligning the mechanism with a precision that blended experience, instinct, and knowledge of the worn bolt's history. Caleb whispered, almost inaudibly, "Daddy, I think it will work," and Jack's hand paused over the bolt, a microsecond of acknowledgement that carried more weight than a speech. Victor Shaw's lips pressed into a thin line, and the engineers held their breath. Rebecca's gaze met Jack's, steady, calculating, yet tinged with anticipation, as if she could already sense the moment when hidden competence would confront ignored warnings, and the factory, for a heartbeat, would decide which judgment truly mattered. The warehouse lights reflected off metal panels and glass windows, catching the scratches on the bolt and the careful handwriting in the maintenance log. Every second stretched as Jack prepared to reconcile history, observation, and immediate action, leaving the room on the cusp of revelation. The soft tension building to a point where one careful adjustment could either validate the quiet work of a single dad and his son or confirm the misjudgments of 30 engineers and a dismissive chief. And as Jack's fingers began the first calculated movement, Rebecca Collins felt a flicker of understanding and anticipation that something fundamental was about to be proven. Yet the outcome remained suspended in the moment, a quiet cliffhanger, as the worn safety bolt and the meticulous log held their secret, waiting for the right hands to unlock it. Jack's fingers had barely begun to move when Victor Shaw stepped between him and the control panel with the quick confidence of a man trying to stop a room from noticing the wrong thing. "That is enough," Victor said. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice carried across the factory floor with the polished authority of someone used to being believed before he was questioned. "This is an active corporate failure review, not a night shift repair bench." Jack lifted his hand from the worn safety bolt and held still. He did not argue at once. He looked first at the open maintenance log, then at the machine, then at Caleb, who had gone quiet beside the cardboard school project. Caleb's toy wrench was pressed against his chest now, no longer held like a badge, but like something he was trying to protect. The change in the boy's face was small, his chin lowered, his shoulders tucked in. Jack saw it, because fathers see the smallest whether in their children. Rebecca Collins saw Jack look at his son, but she did not yet understand what it meant. She was standing inside a crisis large enough to swallow every softer detail in the room. Behind her, the production director was murmuring into a phone. Two plant managers were whispering about missed delivery windows. A legal assistant had arrived from the upstairs office, carrying a folder marked Equipment Incident Review. On a tablet near the control station, a bank representative waited on a video call from Chicago, his face frozen in a polite square of light. Investors were already asking whether the factory could meet the quarter's commitments. The line had to run. The contracts had to hold. The board had to be reassured. Rebecca had spent the last 40 minutes hearing careful language from careful people, and now the mechanic who worked after midnight was refusing to let the machine restart until he checked another page in a handwritten log. "Miss Collins," Victor continued, turning slightly so that his words were meant for her but loud enough for everyone. "We cannot let hourly maintenance staff override engineering protocol. Jack is good with routine repairs. No one is denying that. But he is not authorized to delay a restart based on personal notes." The word personal touched the room like a smudge. Jack's expression did not change, but his thumb rested on the corner of the maintenance log. The pages were not personal. They were dated, signed, and entered under the factory's own maintenance procedure. They listed cycle counts, vibration readings, torque checks, and repeated warnings about the worn safety bolt that sat beside the machine like an old coin no one had bothered to pick up. Jack had not written feelings in that book. He had written facts. Victor knew that. That was why he wanted the book closed. Rebecca stepped toward the steel table and looked down at the log again. The handwriting was plain, careful, steady. It did not look dramatic. It looked like work. "Mr. Miller," she said, and her voice cut cleanly through the hum of the factory. "Why did you open this file during a controlled review?" Jack looked up at her. He had been asked questions before by people who already knew the answer they wanted. This one was different. Not kinder. Different. "Because the answer is in the records," he said. "Line 3 has been warning us for 8 weeks. Victor let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "The line has been operating within acceptable tolerance." Jack turned one page of the maintenance log. His fingers were grease-stained, but the motion was careful, almost gentle. "Not under load," he said. "Not after the new housing was installed." The vibration pattern changed after the replacement. The worn safety bolt started carrying stress it was never meant to carry. One engineer, near the back, shifted his weight. Another glanced at the bolt, then away, as if looking too long might make him responsible. Rebecca's eyes moved from Jack's face to the log. Why was this not in the formal escalation file? She asked. The question was not loud, but Victor answered too quickly. Because it did not meet escalation threshold. Jack's eyes stayed on the page. It did. The room became still in a different way. Before, the silence had been waiting. Now it was listening. Victor turned his head slowly. Excuse me. Jack pointed to a line in the log without looking at him. 3 consecutive notes. Same component. Same pattern. Same line. Under company procedure that required inspection before another full-capacity run. Victor's smile thinned. You are misreading the policy. Jack shook his head once. No, sir. It was the sir that made the answer heavier. There was no disrespect in it. Only refusal. Rebecca's jaw tightened, not with anger exactly, but with pressure. Her company was balanced on a decision that now seemed to have too many layers. The broken machine, the ignored log, the worn bolt, the engineer protecting his department, the mechanic protecting the line, the child watching all of it from the edge of the concrete. Caleb bent slightly and picked up his school project before someone could step on it. The cardboard conveyor belt had folded at one corner. He tried to smooth it with his sleeve. Jack saw that too. Victor saw an opening. This is exactly the problem, he said. He brought a child onto the production floor during a shutdown, opened restricted records, challenged engineering review, and is now refusing to clear the area. Miss Collins, with respect, this cannot continue. Jack finally turned to him. I brought my son because my shift ended at 6 and his presentation is tomorrow. We were headed home. The words were quiet. They did not ask for pity. They just corrected the record. Caleb swallowed and stared at the floor. The toy wrench hung from his fingers now. It looked smaller than it had a few minutes ago. Rebecca looked at the boy, then back at Jack, and something almost softened in her face before the tablet on the control station chimed. The bank representative's voice came through the speaker, thin and distant. Miss Collins, our team needs confirmation within 20 minutes whether production resumes today. The credit line amendment is tied to operational continuity. 20 minutes. The number moved through the room like a closing door. Victor seized it. There it is, he said. We are out of time. We restart at reduced speed, document the anomaly, and complete formal review afterward. Jack closed the log halfway, then stopped. Restarting with that bolt in place is the wrong decision. Victor's face changed. Only slightly. The professional mask remained, but the eyes behind it sharpened. You are refusing a direct order? Jack placed his palm flat on the maintenance log. I am refusing to sign off on a restart I know is unsafe for the equipment and bad for the company. That sentence did what shouting could not have done. It made every person in the room choose where to look. Some looked at Rebecca. Some looked at Victor. Caleb looked at his father. Rebecca looked at Jack's hand on the log. She was not used to being challenged on her own floor, especially not by someone without a title that impressed investors. Yet there was something about the way he said bad for the company. That unsettled her. Not bad for him. Not bad for his pride. Bad for the company. Still, pressure does not always leave room for wisdom. Sometimes it makes authority reach for the nearest clean answer. Rebecca straightened. Her voice became colder, more executive. The voice from boardrooms and lender calls and legal reviews. Mr. Miller, step away from the machine. Caleb's head lifted quickly. Jack did not move. Miss Collins, he said, please read the next entry before you make that call. Victor stepped closer to the table. He was told to step away. Rebecca cut across both of them. Now. The word struck harder because it was calm. Jack looked at her for 1 second, long enough to see that she had not dismissed the log completely, only buried it beneath the deadline pressing against her. Then he stepped back. Caleb moved with him at once, clutching the toy wrench and the damaged project in both hands. The engineers seemed to exhale. Victor reached for the log, but Jack picked it up first and held it against his side. Not hidden, not surrendered, held. Victor's smile returned, but it did not reach his eyes. Security can escort him out if necessary, he said. Rebecca did not answer immediately. She looked at the worn safety bolt on the table, then at the maintenance log under Jack's arm, then at Caleb's bent cardboard factory. The tablet chimed again. 19 minutes. Victor turned toward the control panel and gave the production supervisor a sharp nod. Prepare restart sequence. Jack's hand tightened around the log. Caleb whispered, Daddy, they are not listening. Jack looked down at his son, and his voice stayed steady even as the whole room moved against him. "Not yet," he said. Across the floor, the warning light above line 3 blinked amber, once, twice, and then held steady, as if the machine itself had started counting down. The amber warning light did not blink like an alarm. It held steady, patient, and almost polite, which somehow made it worse. Jack Miller stood 3 steps back from line 3 with the maintenance log tucked against his side, watching Victor Shaw move toward the control panel as if confidence could make a bad decision. Safe. Caleb stood close enough for his sleeve to brush Jack's work pants, his toy wrench held between both hands, his cardboard factory project bent at one corner where he had tried to protect it from the crowd. No one was looking at the project now. No one was looking at the boy. Most eyes were on Rebecca Collins, because power in a room always pulls attention toward itself, and Rebecca had not yet decided whether she was looking at a stubborn mechanic or the first honest warning she had received all morning. Victor lifted one hand toward the production supervisor. "Reduce speed restart," he said. 20% load. We document all readings. If the anomaly appears again, we stop and review." The sentence sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. Bad decisions in corporate rooms rarely arrive looking foolish. They arrive wearing procedure, deadlines, and a calm voice. Jack heard the numbers and looked down at the maintenance log. His thumb rested on a page corner softened by use. He had opened that book so many times on the night shift that the spine no longer closed flat. There were oil marks along the edges, not because he was careless, but because the factory did not wait for clean hands. He turned the log slightly against his body, just enough for his own eyes to find the line he had been thinking about since the warning light came on. It was not the entry Rebecca had read. It was 3 pages earlier. Most people had skipped past it because it looked ordinary. Bolt replaced during housing service. Temporary hold for test alignment. Recheck after 200 cycles. The handwriting under that entry was not Jack's. It was Victor Shaw's initials in the margin, small and sharp, written like a man signing something beneath his attention. Jack stared at the words for one breath longer than he needed to. Then his eyes moved to the worn safety bolt sitting on the table. Everyone kept calling it old. Everyone kept looking at the scratched head and dulled threads, and assuming age was the problem. But Jack had noticed something else. The washer mark was wrong. It was faint, almost hidden beneath grime and pressure staining, a narrow crescent near the shoulder of the bolt where the old washer should have sat flush. On the machine frame, the matching wear pattern was offset by less than a quarter inch. Not enough for a casual glance. Not enough for a polished inspection report. But enough for a mechanic who had spent his nights listening to metal complain before it failed. Jack looked from the bolt to the log, then back to the bolt. His face did not change, but Caleb saw the shift in him. Children who grow up around tired adults learn to read silence. Caleb whispered, "Daddy." Jack held up one finger, not to silence him harshly, but to ask for one more second. Victor turned at the sound. "Mr. Miller, you have been instructed to remain clear." Jack did not step forward. He did not raise his voice. "That is not the original bolt for the housing service." A few engineers looked up. Victor's hand stopped above the panel. Rebecca turned slowly. The bank representative's face remained frozen on the tablet, waiting in its polite square of light. "What did you say?" Rebecca asked. Jack placed the maintenance log on the steel table, opened to the earlier entry, and slid it forward 2 inches. Not toward Victor, toward Rebecca. "This entry says the bolt was temporary after the new housing went in. Recheck after 200 cycles. But the follow-up inspection is missing." Victor gave a small laugh. "It came too quickly. That is not relevant. Temporary hold in this context refers to staging, not operation." Jack looked at the worn safety bolt again. "No, sir. Not with this washer mark." That was the first time the room heard a phrase none of the reports had used. Washer mark. It was small enough to sound almost ridiculous. 30 engineers had discussed load distribution, drive synchronization, sensor drift, motor calibration, shaft timing, and thermal expansion. Jack was talking about a washer mark. Victor took a step closer, annoyance tightening his voice. "We are not delaying a plant restart over a cosmetic mark on a bolt." "It is not cosmetic," Jack said. "The bolt seated wrong under load. The machine has been correcting around it for weeks." One of the younger engineers, a man with safety glasses pushed up on his head, leaned slightly toward the table before he caught himself. He had seen something or thought he had. Rebecca noticed the movement. Jack noticed Rebecca noticing. Victor noticed both and moved faster. Miss Collins, this is exactly what I warned you about. He is building a theory from shop floor marks and handwritten notes. We have vendor diagnostics, digital records, and 30 certified engineers on site. Jack kept his eyes on the log. Digital records show what the sensors measured. The log shows when it started. Rebecca's gaze sharpened. And when did it start? Jack did not answer right away. He turned one page back, then another, letting the silence stretch. This was not theater. It was care. Dates mattered. Sequence mattered. A man who fixed machines by memory could still lose the truth if he skipped the record. 9 weeks ago, he said, 2 days after the housing service. At first it was a soft drift. Then it became a repeating vibration under load. It always showed up after the line warmed past 180 degrees. Victor's expression did not break, but his neck reddened above his collar. Normal break-in behavior. Jack touched the page with one finger. Not when the same bolt shows edge wear after 3 checks. Rebecca looked down at the bolt. For the first time, she did not see a dirty piece of hardware. She saw a small history written in metal, a record no software dashboard had translated for her. The factory around them seemed to hold its breath. The production supervisor stood with his hand near the restart switch. Waiting for a command, he suddenly looked less eager to follow. Caleb stepped forward half an inch, then stopped himself. His school project shifted in his arm. The cardboard conveyor belt sagged, and the little bottle cap wheels he had glued on the night before trembled slightly. Jack saw the project again and remembered the kitchen table, the missing sock, Caleb asking whether mechanics were less than engineers. He looked at his son and then at Rebecca. Miss Collins, he said, I am not trying to win an argument. I am trying to keep the company from restarting the wrong failure. The words landed softly, but they moved through the room. Rebecca did not respond. Her world was made of decisions that carried signatures, contracts, insurance clauses, lender calls, and investor confidence. She understood visible risk. She understood public failure. What she was still learning, in that moment, was the cost of overlooked truth. Victor leaned over the table and reached for the maintenance log. Jack's hand came down on the page first. Not hard, just present. Please do not close it, Jack said. The quiet request made Victor look worse than anger would have. Rebecca's eyes moved to Victor's hand. Victor withdrew it slowly. This is absurd, he said. The man is refusing chain of command. The chain of command missed the follow-up, Jack said. No one spoke. That was the sentence that changed the air. Not enough to clear Jack. Not enough to expose Victor. Not yet. But enough to place a crack in the wall Victor had been building all morning. Rebecca looked at the earlier entry again. Temporary hold for test alignment. Recheck after 200 cycles. No follow-up signature. No inspection note. No replacement record. Then she looked at the worn safety bolt. The crescent mark near the shoulder seemed more visible now that Jack had named it. Some truths stay invisible until someone gives the room the right words. The tablet chimed again. The bank representative cleared his throat through the speaker. Miss Collins, we are at 15 minutes. Victor straightened, seizing the interruption like a lifeline. We cannot afford to entertain every theory. Give me authorization, and I will restart under controlled conditions. Jack's jaw tightened. He picked up the worn safety bolt and turned it between his fingers so the overhead light caught the narrow crescent near the shoulder. Ask him where the replacement bolt went, Jack said. Rebecca looked at Jack, then at Victor. Victor's smile faded by 1 careful degree. There was no replacement bolt, he said. Jack did not look away. Then why did you initial a temporary hold? The question was simple. Too simple. It did not accuse. It opened a door. Behind that door was either an explanation or a problem. Rebecca Collins stood very still. Caleb held his toy wrench against his chest. The factory warning light stayed amber. And for the first time, Victor Shaw did not answer before the silence could reach him. The factory floor hummed with nervous energy as Rebecca Collins stood near the mezzanine rail, arms crossed, watching the subtle chaos ripple outward. An audit notification had arrived less than 10 minutes ago, and the investor call scheduled for 2 hours was already signaling tension in muted voices over the conference line. The bank had frozen discretionary accounts for safety checks, payroll calculations hung in the balance, and lines of production risked shutdown if any error propagated. The AI monitoring system flagged unusual vibration readings, feeding legal and compliance departments with alerts that could escalate to recalls, ownership disputes, or loan covenant violations. Victor Shaw leaned against a steel beam with a faintly triumphant expression, having benefited from the early decision to override Jack's warning. For now, operational metrics looked stable on the dashboards, and the management team had no immediate proof of the latent risk he had ignored. Jack Miller, kneeling beside Caleb with the maintenance log open on the floor, his hands hovering over the worn safety bolt, felt the weight of every gaze, every call, every pending report, yet he did not panic. Caleb fidgeted with the toy wrench, watching the numbers on a small monitor, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. Jack's eyes traced the log entries, scanning dates, torque measurements, and notes that had been overlooked for weeks. Each line of the record revealed patterns that could predict failure. Each omission Victor had allowed increased the pressure in the room, stretching the credibility of the engineers who had relied on digital summaries rather than hands-on observation. On a large monitor, a graph showed a subtle anomaly, vibration peaks spiking in a cadence misaligned with expected thresholds. The CFO was muttering into a phone, confirming payroll calculations. The in-house legal counsel had begun drafting a conditional filing for potential non-compliance, and the AI's predictive analytics highlighted risk areas for every machine on the line. Jack's hand hovered over the worn bolt again, a silent signal only he could read, a confirmation that one small detail could determine whether the factory would run safely or cascade into legal and financial exposure. He turned a page in the maintenance log, revealing a pattern of warnings previously dismissed. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He pointed subtly at a note. The alignment stress under repeated load was off by millimeters, cumulative over several cycles. Every engineer who had previously shrugged now glanced at the log, hesitation flickering in their eyes. But Victor Shaw still maintained an expression of careful control, masking the faint unease in his posture. He had already framed the upcoming restart as a victory, presenting it to investors as a demonstration of resilience. Rebecca Collins took in the scene, her mind racing through operational risks, financial exposures, and the public optics if a shutdown occurred. She noticed Jack's quiet focus, the boy at his side, the worn bolt resting between Jack's fingers like a signal for attention that only the observant could interpret. She understood the evidence was there, in metal and paper, yet she hesitated. Corporate protocol, board expectations, and looming deadlines pressed against her judgment. Her fingers tapped lightly against the mezzanine rail as she processed the tension. She had built this empire through decisive action, through interpreting incomplete data, and through trusting her executive team. Victor Shaw had reinforced her confidence in early assessments, dismissing Jack as cautious but unnecessary. Now, however, the latent risk pressed at her awareness, each anomaly in the log threatening to make the decision to restart look reckless. The factory, in its steady mechanical rhythm, seemed to wait with them. The ambient noise of conveyors and compressors, normally background, became a marker of time passing, every second a reminder that operational decisions had immediate consequence. Jack shifted slightly, his hand brushing the worn bolt, eyes flicking to the log, then to Caleb, whose small expression mirrored the silent understanding that something critical was in play. The production supervisors glanced at each other, the engineers exchanged brief, tense looks, and the CFO ended a call abruptly, sensing the room had shifted. Victor Shaw remained, outwardly composed, inwardly balancing the benefit of appearing right against the possibility that Jack's observation would prove unavoidable. Rebecca Collins squared her shoulders, lifting her chin with the precise authority she always carried into boardrooms, auditor calls, and crisis meetings. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, deliberate, and cutting through every other sound. We proceed under the assumption that the line is safe and restart in 10 minutes unless contrary evidence is provided. Her words were a double down, a reinforcement of authority over caution. Jack did not move. Caleb fidgeted but stayed close. The worn bolt caught the fluorescent light again, highlighting the minute crescent mark that no one had emphasized before. The maintenance log lay open, each page a record of diligence and unseen risk, waiting for recognition that might or might not come before the restart sequence initiated. Silence settled over the room in an almost cinematic pause. Outside the factory, digital notifications pinged at investors and legal offices, each one a silent countdown to whether the decision to restart would validate leadership or expose oversight. Rebecca Collins exhaled slowly, her decision doubling down, and the factory floor held its collective breath, the open loop of the hidden crisis suspended in time, poised between compliance, failure, and the truth that only Jack could reveal. Rebecca Collins did not raise her voice when she made the decision, and that was what made it feel final. "Mr. Miller, you are relieved from duty pending review." The words traveled across the factory floor more cleanly than the warning chime, more cleanly than the bank representative waiting on the tablet, more cleanly than the low, nervous hum of line 3. Jack Miller stood with the maintenance log under one arm and the worn safety bolt still resting on the steel table, and for 1 second he did not move. Not because he was surprised. Men like Jack learned early that being right did not always protect you from being dismissed. He was still because Caleb was watching. His son stood beside the bent cardboard school project with the toy wrench hanging from one hand, and his face had gone careful in that way children become careful when adults make the room unsafe for feelings. Victor Shaw stepped forward at once, as if he had been waiting for permission to turn humiliation into procedure. "Security will walk you to the exit," he said, "and leave the company records here." Jack looked down at the maintenance log. The oil-darkened cover had been in his hands on cold nights, hot nights, holiday shifts, storm shifts, and the kind of 3 in the morning hours when the entire factory sounded like one tired animal breathing through steel lungs. He had written the truth in that book when no one was watching. Now everyone was watching, and they wanted him to put it down. "This is an active maintenance record," Jack said quietly. "It should stay with the machine." Victor's smile was small, then set it down. The command was simple, but Caleb heard what lived inside it. His fingers tightened around the toy wrench until his knuckles paled. Jack bent slightly, not toward Victor, but toward his son. "Caleb," he said, "pick up your project." Caleb swallowed. "Did you do something wrong?" The question broke through the room softer than a whisper and heavier than an accusation. A few engineers looked away. One of the production supervisors lowered his eyes to the concrete. Jack took the school project from Caleb's shaking hands and tucked the bent corner flat with his thumb. "No, buddy," he said. "Sometimes doing the right thing takes longer for people to understand." Victor let out a breath through his nose. "That is a nice lesson, but this is not a classroom." Jack looked at him then, not with anger. Anger would have made Victor comfortable. Jack looked at him with the plain patience of a man who had already lost the argument in public and still refused to hand over the truth inside himself. "No," Jack said. "It is a factory. That is why the records matter." Rebecca's face did not change, but the line of her mouth tightened. She was watching the bank clock on the screen, the audit alert on her phone, the legal team waiting upstairs, and Victor's promise that a reduced-speed restart would protect the quarter from collapsing into a shutdown notice. Pressure makes good leaders decisive. It also makes them vulnerable to the person who sounds most certain. Victor sounded certain. Jack only sounded steady. Security arrived from the side corridor, 2 men in gray shirts who looked uncomfortable before they reached him. Everyone knew Jack. He fixed the break room ice machine without logging the time. He helped forklift drivers jump dead batteries in winter. He checked loose railings near the employee stairs because someone's mother used that entrance on visiting day. He was the kind of worker a place quietly depended on while publicly forgetting. "Jack," one guard said, almost apologetic. Jack nodded once. "It is all right." He placed the maintenance log on the steel table, but he did not close it. That mattered. The open page showed the temporary hold entry, the missing follow-up, the repeated vibration notes, and the line he had marked 3 weeks ago. Safety bolt carrying uneven load. Replaced before full capacity run. He set Caleb's school project under his left arm and took his son's hand with his right. As he walked away, Victor raised his voice just enough for the nearest engineers to hear. "This is what happens when a man mistakes a wrench for authority." A few people gave nervous half-smiles. Not real laughter. Worse, the kind people offer when they want the powerful person to know they are on the safe side. Caleb looked back. Jack did not. He looked at the exit. Just the exit. The factory doors opened onto the employee corridor, and the sound of the floor faded behind them. Caleb's toy wrench tapped softly against his leg with every step. "Daddy," he said. They called you a fraud. Jack stopped near the time clock, where dozens of punch cards sat in their metal slots. His own card was still there, marked with nights, weekends, and hours that had held the line together while other people slept. He crouched beside Caleb and smoothed the folded edge of the school project one more time. A fraud pretends, he said. We wrote things down. Caleb looked at him, eyes bright but holding. Will the machine break? Jack looked toward the closed factory door. He could still hear the muffled tone of line 3 preparing to restart. Machines usually tell the truth, he said. The question is whether people listen in time. Inside the factory, Victor Shaw stood at the control station with Rebecca Collins beside him and the investors still waiting through the bank representative speaker. The maintenance log remained open on the steel table, unattended for the first time since Jack had set it down. The worn safety bolt lay beside it, small and dull under the fluorescent lights, carrying the crescent mark Jack had named but not yet explained. Proceed, Rebecca said. Her voice was steady. Victor nodded to the production supervisor. Reduced speed restart. 20% load. The line gave a low mechanical shudder as power moved through the system. For the first 30 seconds, nothing dramatic happened. The conveyor shifted. The motor settled. A few engineers exhaled. Victor allowed himself the faintest smile, the smile of a man who believed the room had returned to its proper order. Stable, one technician called. Temperature normal, another added. Rebecca watched the metrics on the screen, willing the numbers to behave. The bank representative leaned closer to his camera. Can we report operational continuity? Victor answered before Rebecca could. Yes. That was when the first vibration appeared. It was not loud. It did not stop the line. It showed itself as a thin flutter on the monitor, a small spike so brief that 2 senior engineers missed it entirely. But a junior engineer named Noah Price saw it, because he had been standing near the open log, staring at the page Jack had refused to close. Noah was 26, new enough to the company to still read footnotes, new enough to be embarrassed by arrogance, and tired enough to stop pretending he understood what the older men dismissed. His eyes moved from the screen to Jack's handwriting. Vibration appears after warm-up. Load stress shifts at 180 degrees. Check washer seat. He frowned. Washer seat. The phrase was not in Victor's report. It was not in the vendor diagnostic summary. It was only in Jack's notes, written beneath the formal entry like a mechanic leaving a breadcrumb for anyone willing to follow. Noah looked at the worn safety bolt on the table. He picked it up carefully and turned it toward the overhead light. The crescent mark flashed, faint but real. He looked at the machine frame, then at the bolt again. His throat tightened. Mr. Shaw, he said. Victor did not turn. Not now. The second vibration spike appeared, larger than the first. The motor sound changed by almost nothing, but Noah heard it because Jack had made him hear it in the log. He stepped closer to the table, flipping back one page, then another. The temporary hold entry. Victor's initials. No follow-up. The missing inspection. The replacement bolt that Victor had said never existed. Noah's hand hovered over the page. He suddenly understood that the problem was not only mechanical. It was documentary. It was procedural. It was the kind of mistake that could become legal, financial, and public if the wrong people saw it after the line failed instead of before. Miss Collins, Noah said, louder this time. Rebecca turned. Victor turned too, annoyance already forming. Noah held up the worn safety bolt, his face pale beneath the factory lights. Jack was not guessing, he said. The room went quiet around the running machine. On the monitor, the third spike rose higher than the first 2. Rebecca looked at the bolt in Noah's hand, then at the open maintenance log, then toward the corridor where Jack and Caleb had just disappeared. For the first time all morning, her certainty did not feel like strength. It felt like a door closing too late. The third vibration spike did not stay inside the factory. It traveled through the building in quieter ways first, through the production dashboard that fed compliance, through the audit software Rebecca Collins had approved 6 months earlier, through the automated lender portal that had been built to watch operational risk in real time. A red flag appeared on the tablet beside the control panel, then another on the wall screen in the upstairs conference room where the investor call was still open. Then a legal alert landed in the company counsel's inbox with the words "Equipment restart after unresolved maintenance warning." Nothing exploded. Nothing dramatic broke apart. That was not how a corporate crisis usually began. It began with people looking at screens and realizing the record was already moving faster than the story they wanted to tell. Noah Price stood beside the steel table holding the worn safety bolt, his face pale as the fourth spike rose on the monitor. Victor Shaw reached for the bolt as if taking it back could take back the meaning of it. Noah stepped half a pace away, not bold enough to challenge him openly, but not willing to surrender the only object in the room that suddenly made sense. "Miss Collins," Noah said, his voice tight. "The washer seat mark lines up with Jack Miller's log entry." The load drift began after the temporary hold. Victor's eyes cut toward him. "You are misreading shop notes." Rebecca did not speak. Her attention had moved to the large screen where the AI monitoring system had placed 3 timelines side by side. The restart sequence, the vibration spikes, and the maintenance entries Jack had written over 8 weeks. The system had not understood the problem before because no one had connected the handwritten record to the digital anomaly. Now that Noah had entered the phrase washer seat into the search field, the pattern was building itself in front of them with cold, embarrassing patience. Temporary hold. No follow-up inspection. Repeated vibration under load. Edge were on safety bolt. Reduced speed restart. Rising instability. Power talks first. Proof talks last. The room goes silent. Rebecca heard the silence before she understood she was inside it. The investors on the screen stopped asking questions. The bank representative did not move. The production supervisor lowered his hand from the control station. The 30 engineers who had looked past Jack began looking at the open maintenance log, as if it had changed shape while they were not paying attention. Victor Shaw stood alone in the middle of all that stillness, and for the first time his certainty looked like something he had borrowed. "Stop the line," Rebecca said. Her voice was quiet. The supervisor hit the shutdown command, and the machine powered down in layers, not with failure, but with the long exhale of something spared from being pushed past its limit. The factory settled into a hum of emergency lights, cooling fans, and people afraid to be the first to speak. Rebecca looked toward the corridor where Jack had disappeared with his son. The decision she had made sat in her chest like a closed fist. She had trusted the title over the record. She had trusted the confident voice over the careful one. She had sent away the man who had tried to protect the company from the very crisis now writing itself across her screens. "Find Mr. Miller," she said. No one moved fast enough. Now, in the employee corridor, Jack had not made it to the parking lot yet. He stood beside the vending machines with Caleb's school project balanced carefully on top of an old recycling bin, while Caleb fixed the bent conveyor belt with a piece of tape from his backpack. Security waited a few feet away, uneasy and quiet. Jack had his lunch cooler in one hand and his employee badge in the other. He had taken the badge off slowly, not because he was ashamed, but because things deserved to be handled with respect even when people did not. Caleb pressed the tape down and looked up. "Are we going home?" Jack glanced toward the factory doors. The building had changed sounds. A man who had spent years listening to machines could hear the difference between a normal stop and a worried one. "Not yet," he said. One of the security guards heard the same urgency in the hall radio. Line 3 stopped. CEO requesting Miller back on floor. Repeat, bring Miller back. Caleb's eyes widened. Jack closed his hand around the badge. He did not smile. He did not look satisfied. A smaller man might have enjoyed the reversal. Jack only looked tired, and underneath the tiredness, responsible. "Daddy?" Caleb asked. Jack picked up the school project and handed it to him carefully. "Stay close to me," he said. "We are going back because the machine still matters." Caleb tucked the toy wrench into the pocket of his hoodie and followed. When Jack returned to the factory floor, the room did not welcome him. It made space for him. That was different. People stepped aside without being told, not with respect fully formed, but with the first uncomfortable shape of it. Rebecca stood by the steel table. Victor stood to her right. Noah stood to her left with the worn safety bolt still in his hand. The maintenance log lay open on the table like a witness no one could cross-examine into changing its story. Jack walked to it, set his lunch cooler down, and gently placed Caleb's school project on an empty crate away from the machine. Then he turned to Rebecca. She met his eyes, and for one moment there was no boardroom, no investor call, no lender portal, no title between them. Only a wrong decision and the man it had landed on. "Mr. Miller," she said, "can you show us what you saw?" Jack looked at the worn safety bolt in Noah's hand. Put it on the table under the camera. Noah did. Rebecca nodded to the compliance manager, and within seconds the overhead inspection camera projected the bolt onto the wall screen beside the maintenance log scan. Enlarged under white light, the tiny crescent mark looked enormous. A scar in the wrong place. Jack pointed without touching it. That mark should be centered under the washer. It is not. The bolt did not seat square after the housing service. He turned the log one page back. This entry says temporary hold for test alignment. That means the machine could be positioned for a short diagnostic run, not returned to production load. Victor's face tightened. That is your interpretation. Jack did not look at him. He pointed to the next page. This is the required follow-up. It is blank. Rebecca's eyes went to Victor. Jack turned another page. After that, the vibration starts. Not every cycle. Not cold. Only warm, under load. That is why 30 engineers could chase the motor, the sensor, the drive, and the software and still miss it. The machine was not failing everywhere. It was compensating for one bad seed in one small place. Noah swallowed. One bolt. Jack nodded once. One bolt. The words seemed almost too small for the size of the crisis around them, but that was why they worked. The screen showed the metal. The log showed the dates. The AI timeline now connected the pattern. The legal team upstairs could see it. The bank representative could see it. The investors could see it. Rebecca could see it. What happens if we continue running it? She asked. Jack chose his words carefully. He was not there to frighten people. He was there to tell the truth. You keep getting false readings until the alignment damage spreads. Then the repair stops being one bolt and becomes a shutdown no one can explain fast enough. He paused, looking at Caleb for half a second, then back at Rebecca. And the record will show the warning was already here. That sentence reached the room last. It did not accuse loudly. It only opened the file all the way. Victor Shaw's hand rested on the edge of the table. His fingers were still, but his face had lost its polished calm. Rebecca looked from the blown-up image of the worn safety bolt to the maintenance log, then to Jack Miller, the single dad she had ordered out minutes earlier. Can it be corrected now? She asked. Jack looked at the machine. He looked at the bolt. He looked at the log one more time, because proof had brought him back, and proof deserved the final word. Yes, he said, but not with that bolt. The room stayed silent as Jack reached into the side pocket of his worn work bag and pulled out a small paper envelope, folded twice, labeled in blue ink with the same line number and date as the missing follow-up entry. Victor Shaw's eyes moved to the envelope, and all the color seemed to drain from his certainty. Jack placed it beside the maintenance log and did not open it yet. Jack Miller did not open the paper envelope with a flourish. He did not hold it up like a trophy. He placed it flat beside the maintenance log, smoothed the folded edge with 2 fingers, and waited until Rebecca Collins gave him permission to continue. That small pause changed the room more than any speech could have. A few minutes earlier, Jack had been treated like a problem to remove. Now the factory floor, the investor call, the bank representative, the legal team upstairs, and 30 engineers were all watching a night shift mechanic handle the truth more carefully than anyone else had handled power. Rebecca looked at the envelope, then at the enlarged image of the worn safety bolt on the wall screen, then at Victor Shaw. Victor had not moved. His face was still arranged into professional control, but the certainty behind it had collapsed. The overhead inspection camera showed the crescent mark on the old bolt in bright, white detail. The maintenance log showed the missing follow-up entry. The AI timeline showed the vibration pattern beginning after the housing service. The bank representative on the screen had stopped asking about operational continuity. The investors had stopped asking about production volume. Everyone was waiting for the envelope. Rebecca's voice was low. Open it. Jack nodded once. He unfolded the paper slowly. Inside was a clean replacement safety bolt, still in its labeled part sleeve, with a receiving slip folded behind it. The label matched line 3. The part number matched the housing service. The date matched the temporary hold entry. And at the bottom of the receiving slip was a small stamped note from the stockroom. Replacement issued, awaiting engineering sign-off. Jack placed the slip under the camera. The words appeared on the wall screen large enough for the entire room to read. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every ignored warning, every dismissed note, every time someone had mistaken a clean shirt for competence and grease on a sleeve for ignorance. Rebecca's eyes moved to Victor. Why was this part never installed? Victor opened his mouth, but no answer came quickly enough to save him. He looked at the slip, then at the log, then at the bolt, searching for a sentence that could sound like procedure instead of neglect. There were competing priorities, he said finally. The line was needed for production. Rebecca's expression did not change, but her voice hardened. That is not an answer. Noah Price, the junior engineer, stood very still beside the table, as if afraid that moving would disturb the truth now that it had finally arrived. Caleb stood near the crate with his school project held against his chest, his toy wrench tucked into his hoodie pocket. He did not fully understand bank freezes, audit trails, legal exposure, or board review. But he understood when a room stopped laughing at his father. He understood that the thing his dad had written down had mattered. Rebecca turned toward the conference screen where the investors, the bank representative, and the company counsel were visible in separate windows. She did not ask for the call to be muted. She did not hide behind a private meeting. She stood on the factory floor in front of the people who had seen her make the wrong call, and she corrected it where the damage had happened. For the record, she said, Mr. Jack Miller identified the cause of Line 3's failure through the maintenance log before restart. His warning was dismissed by management, including by me. That was my mistake. The room seemed to draw in one breath. Public correction is expensive for powerful people. That is why it means something when it is done plainly. Rebecca continued. Line 3 will remain stopped until the replacement safety bolt is installed, the housing alignment is inspected, and compliance signs off. The maintenance record will be preserved. Human Resources will restore Mr. Miller to active status immediately, with no disciplinary mark. His removal from the floor is rescinded. Jack looked down for a moment, not in victory, but in relief that arrived too quietly to celebrate. Caleb's hand found his sleeve. Jack covered the boy's fingers with his own. Victor Shaw's face changed then. Not dramatically. Not the way villains change in stories told by people who need the world to be simple. His confidence thinned into calculation, then into the uncomfortable stillness of a man realizing that the record he had ignored had become the record that would judge him. Rebecca turned to the company counsel on the screen. Begin a formal audit of the housing service, the missing follow-up inspection, and all supervisory decisions tied to this restart. Mr. Shaw is relieved of authority over Line 3 pending board review. Victor stiffened. Rebecca, that is unnecessary. She looked at him then, not as a colleague, not as a shield for the leadership team, but as the chief executive responsible for the people, contracts, lenders, and workers his decision had put at risk. Do not call me Rebecca in this room. The words were quiet. They did not need to be loud. You ignored a maintenance log, dismissed a documented warning, and recommended a restart while a required replacement part sat in a labeled sleeve. The audit will determine whether this becomes a demotion, removal, or legal referral. No one smiled. Jack did not smile. That mattered too. Real justice does not need an audience to clap. The production supervisor brought a clean steel tray. Jack placed the worn safety bolt on it first, then the replacement bolt still in its sleeve, then the maintenance log opened to the temporary hold entry. Noah photographed each item under compliance direction. The legal assistant printed a chain of custody form. Rebecca signed it. Noah signed as witness. Then Jack signed last, his handwriting steady, the same handwriting that had filled the log during nights when no one important had been there to see it. After the signatures, Rebecca stepped beside him. She did not offer a dramatic apology. She did something harder. She spoke in a way that let the whole factory hear. Mr. Miller, I saw your title before I saw your work. That was wrong. This company owes you recognition, and it owes this floor a system that listens before a crisis, makes listening convenient. Jack looked at her for a long second. I was not trying to embarrass anybody, he said. I know. I was trying to keep the line honest. Rebecca nodded. You did. The replacement took 11 minutes. Jack did not work alone. He made Noah verify the part number. He made the production supervisor confirm lockout status. He made the compliance manager record the housing alignment. He let the engineers watch, not to humiliate them, but to teach the room what attention looked like when ego stepped aside. When the machine restarted again, it did not roar like a miracle. It came back in clean layers. Motor, belt, drive, conveyor, rhythm. The vibration graph stayed flat. The temperature climbed past 180 degrees without a spike. The line settled into the sound Jack had been waiting to hear all morning, the sound of metal no longer arguing with itself. Caleb grinned then, small and bright, and pulled the toy wrench from his pocket. "Daddy," he whispered, "my project is right." Jack looked at the bent cardboard conveyor belt, the bottle cap wheels, the taped safety bolt drawn in silver marker, and he laughed once under his breath. "Yes, buddy," he said, "your project is right." Later, after the investor call ended, after the bank lifted the freeze on operating review, after payroll was confirmed, after line 3 resumed under documented sign-off, Jack carried the worn safety bolt and a copied page from the maintenance log to the small metal cabinet beside the night shift desk. Rebecca stood nearby, not intruding, only witnessing. Caleb watched from the chair where he was repairing the bent corner of his school project with fresh tape. Jack placed the bolt in a labeled evidence bag, then slid it into the cabinet with the copied log page. He did not keep it to punish Victor. He did not keep it to retell the story as revenge. He kept it because memory needs a place to live, and dignity needs proof when powerful people forget how small truths can be. Victor Shaw's office light remained on upstairs as the audit team began its work. His name would be reviewed by the board. His decisions would be traced through emails, sign-offs, and missing forms. That was not revenge either. That was accountability. Before Jack left, Rebecca stopped him near the employee exit. "Your badge will work in the morning," she said. Jack clipped it back onto his jacket. Caleb stood beside him with the toy wrench in one hand and the school project in the other. For the first time all day, the boy stood tall. Jack looked through the glass window at the factory floor, where line 3 ran steady under soft white light. Then he looked down at his son. "Ready to go home?" Caleb nodded. "I have to practice my presentation." Jack smiled. "Then we better get dinner first." They walked out together, not richer, not louder, not suddenly different people, but restored in the quiet way that matters most. Behind them, one machine ran correctly because one man had paid attention when no one was watching. And that was the lesson Caleb carried into school the next morning, written in careful block letters beneath his cardboard factory line. The smallest part can hold the biggest truth, and honest work is never small when it protects people.